Hello, everyone. My name is Gary Gomes. I'm happy to be with you this wonderful Sunday. It's the start of daylight savings time for those of you who adhere to that tradition. The So it's currently 10:56 here where I am in the United States. We'll be drawing up a chart for that particular moment. Uh, the purpose of this is to discuss Vedic astrology, how it works to a certain extent, how it affects events in the world, and how it reflects events in the world. So essentially, we all know we're going to have good or bad times. How we react to those is largely dependent on how our destiny turns out. So, uh, so, I'm not a fatalist. Certain events will happen. Certain events will. He said, I'm not a vandalist. I'm not a fatalist. Uh, all right. So I'm going to talk with you about this week's forecast. The eclipse coming March 14th is a lunar eclipse. That means Rahu, or the North Lunar Node, has primary um, influence on the planet, and that essentially shows panic and a certain amount of dissatisfaction and disruption. K2 is disruptive, but it's more of and that'll come around March 29th. The K2 eclipse, which will be a solar eclipse, will come um, in the same sign, but also it will come basically, it will cause disruption or actual movement in governments or, or it may even cause some violence. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen. But uh, let, let's look at the chart and we'll go from there. Okay. If you would like to consult me for a reading or for Vedic astrology lessons, please contact me at 508 525 0001. Again, that's 508 525 0001. Uh, I'm going to say it a third time because the transcription didn't look good. 508 525 0001. And you can also email me at garygomesg@gmail.com. Okay. So I can't discuss pricing in this particular format, but you can contact me by email or by text message. It's the phone number, and I can give you the prices. Okay. So so essentially, I can also talk to you about what you want to learn, how you want to learn it. I may even refer you to another teacher who may be better equipped than I am for your particular mission. There's a large network now of Vedic astrology teachers that didn't exist when I was learning. So you have a wider choice, which is always a good thing. All right, so let's look at the chart for today. And I've noticed people have gotten a little bit tense over the past couple of days, so let me see what's causing that. All right, so this is okay. So we have, all right, so I can see what's happening here. All right, I'm going to show you the chart. Let's see, share the screen. All right, so you can probably see the screen. I'm not going to go through the three times because I have a prompt on my computer that lets me know when you're seeing it. And the main thing that's happening right now is Venus is retrograde, turned retrograde earlier this week. So what does that mean in plain English? Well, Venus is, technically speaking, in terms of natural strength, it's the strongest planet in the chart. Okay, so and when I say natural strength, that's in terms of brightness. Only the sun and moon are brighter. Rahu and Ketu have the power to eclipse the sun and the moon, so they're actually the strongest influences in the chart. But in terms of the planets, what we call the starry planets like Venus, Jupiter. So in terms of strength, it's Venus, Jupiter, Mars. I'm sorry, Jupiter. I'm sorry, Venus, Jupiter, Mercury, Mars, and Saturn in terms of brightness to dullness. And to me, it's always been interesting. The malefic planets are uh, shine less brightly. Okay, so Mars actually is a rather striking thing if you can locate it in the sky, but it's not as bright as Jupiter is. And Venus is, if you see Venus under the right conditions, it's really about twice the size of Jupiter. So retrograde's natural strengths are actually bigger than uh, they're actually greater than their natural strengths. So Venus is actually retrograde, but that also makes us question things. So question our wants and desires, and it also inflates our wants and desires. If we're unhappy with somebody, we'll become more unhappy if we're happy, or if we see sort of like a limitless perspective coming up. Uh, we're also happy with that. Also, one important change that I mentioned, I believe last week, is Mercury's debilitated. So I think I've noticed whenever Mercury's debilitated in a chart, decisions are really tough to make with any kind of certainty. Um, and so you find yourself like going off in all kinds of directions. Should I get this? Should I ask this? Should I do this? Should I, so you never quite know which direction is up. The moon is in Cancer. That's a good thing. It just passed over Mars where it was yesterday. That gave us a lot of energy. But right now it's at a really early degree of Cancer, and that emphasizes home life, emphasizes change in desires or ambitions. Moon is in its own sign right now. Jupiter does change signs, but Mars, with Venus, excuse me, but Mars is in the second house. So that'll make us a little bit nasty for like the next couple of hours. Um, so just keep that in mind, because the rising sign is going to go through that sign in about half an hour, and people's speech will be a little bit short this morning, a little bit curt, a little bit angry, and also that what I would call that relatively pleasant state that a lot of people experienced when Venus was exalted and with Rahu is sort of like a dreamlike state. I would equate it with like a Neptunian bliss state for Western astrology. It's that will turn into more questioning and more indecision, and just because Mercury's involved as well. So you'll have a lot of indecision about, especially about purchases, about goals, about what you want to do with your life, those kinds of things. And Saturn is close to changing signs. It's really not going to change signs until the end of this month. But as Saturn and Sun and Saturn are really close to each other, so they're in a state called combustion. And and essentially, so Saturn's out of what's called the Cazimi range, which is within 1 degree of the sun, and it's moving. It's it feels like it can't get disciplined. It can't do what it wants to do, okay? Which is control things um, and as a matter of fact, earlier this week, a lot of people probably felt like the controls were off. You know, they could do whatever the heck they wanted to, and they got overly ambitious and overly say expansive in a silly way. Okay, so these combinations, the Sun Saturn combination, Saturn gets worse as it gets towards the end of a sign. Uh, Malefics have that trait. Mars is getting worse as it's heading towards the end of a sign. And I think one of the things you have to watch out for, especially with Venus and Mercury involved, and with Mars in Gemini, is the potential for accidents, you know, especially car accidents and injuries. So that's something that people should really pay a close attention to. Monetarily, there'll be more aggressive energy connected with money. Jupiter's exchanging lordships with Venus. So Jupiter's in Taurus, which is Venus' sign, and Venus is in Pisces, which is Jupiter's sign. So you have a kind of exchange between the two benefic planets, but one of them's a little bit, I would say, overly pumped up. Venus is a little bit overly pumped up in this position. So Venus, by the way, quite a few astrologers have a very negative impression of Venus. Um, I won't say that universally, but especially in Vedic astrology. And from my experience, it's not a bad planet. But when it's a little bit afflicted, its ability to control one's senses gets a little bit weakened. And we tend to get a little bit lazy and a little bit greedy. So that Venus Rahu conjunction certainly isn't helping the Venus Mercury conjunction, although Venus is helping Mercury because it's making its Mercury is feeling boundless, but that retrograde Venus is saying, is it going to be worth it? Is it going to be worth the risk you're taking? But still wants you to move forward and grab as much as you can. So just keep that in mind over the next couple of months or so, because the Venus retrograde will be around for a while. And the Mercury debilitation, at least a month, probably longer. So, so again, the next 6 months, I would say, is not a good time to make major purchases, um, except unless it's on things you already decided you would buy when Venus was direct. So, and that would have been earlier this week. So, so, so essentially, I would encourage hesitation in making major purchases, major financial grabs, major investment grabs over the next, I would say, month and a half or so, because we are going to have that Saturn Rahu conjunction in April, which I've been advising you about. I think I probably overplayed it because I don't think it's going to be. I think it's going to be disruptive. I think there are going to be a lot of demonstrations like we saw in the late 60s, and maybe even some violence, but nothing. It won't last as long as it did in the late 60s. So again, we're talking about maybe a 2 month, 3 month period versus uh, literally major disputes. And I think you're going to see a lot more demonstrations in the more conservative direction because with Saturn and Rahu and equally strong demonstrations in the liberal direction across the world. So we are seeing a lot of shifting governments. That's very, very true. Canada will shift. Um, Canada will have a new prime minister within a couple of months. Um, Germany will have a new prime minister and a new cabinet. As a matter of fact, Germany is taking a very um, unusual approach in that the prime minister to be is trying to pass a constitutional amendment in Germany with the current legislature, which has just been voted out of office. So that's fascinating. Uh, I don't know. I can't judge whether or not that's against German law or not. I don't know anything about German law or other German constitution, but it is very unorthodox, and it's really mainly to allow the German government to engage in deficit spending, which it has um, a strict rule against, and we can trace the strict rule back to fears um, of any inflation in Germany, dating back to the Weimar Republic. Now, that inflation rate was caused by foreign debts, and the German government trying to print money to keep up with foreign debts. This is done to increase uh, the German defense budget and other things in order to amp up aid to the Ukraine and also to meet um, certain mandates that it has to meet in order to bolster NATO. So it'll be interesting to see what happens out of this. Um, as so, so we'll look at the eclipse map shortly. But this week, again, not really a bad week. Just be careful about impulsive purchases. This is especially true right now. And also, I mean, selling things is fine. Selling off things at a high profit is fine. But impulsive purchase is not a good idea. And also, um, so there'll be some deals that'll look too good to be true. And you'll say, well, I can handle that. I can accommodate that. That's fine. I can master that. And I think uh, given what I'm seeing happening after July, uh, it's going to be like a hard reality dose. Now, again, keep in mind that I'm not expecting a recession or even a major economic downturn. Some of my fellow astrologers are, uh, but I am expecting what I would call a readjustment period as people get used to new market conditions. So again, that market condition, that panic around April 15th, I think will be focused around that. Okay. It'll be focused around finances. But again, I'm not seeing anything like a disastrous um, economic decline. You may even see more confidence in things like um, current currencies, less interest in gold, and you know, and again, keep in mind this is just me prognosticating. I'm not an investment advisor by any stretch of the imagination. So let me see if I can get that rasp out of my voice by taking more breaths, and because that's always the danger, right? So if I'm not giving myself enough oxygen, I sound rizzy. Okay, so the let's go to let's go to the hop. Okay, let's go to the March 14th eclipse chart. I just had it up right there. There we go. There we have it. So I use Greenwich, England, mainly because the time of eclipse starts. I usually judge from Universal Time, which is based out of Greenwich, the Greenwich Observatory in England. And the first thing that strikes me about this chart is the eclipse is occurring in eclipse point is in Virgo, but the moon is in Leo. So this is fascinating because you have this sign connected with inherited wealth. The moon is in a nakshatra connected with inherited or philanthropic wealth. And the sun is in a sign which is connected with uh, governmental restriction and also reform. Okay. So we have that strong Sun Saturn conjunction. It is a cazimi, what's called a cazimi sun, or Saturn, excuse me. So Saturn's within 1 degree. Well, it's close enough. It's just outside of the range, but it's close enough. In this case, I think that we can call it. So this will actually encourage more government oversight all over the world. That will cause some anger, some protest, Mars aspect in K2, some problems with the media, essentially because Mercury is debilitated. I forgot to mention that before. And Mercury with Rahu and aspect in K2 is a setup for a combination connected with lies. So we are getting governments misrepresenting what they're doing. We are getting governments trying to find ways to cheat um, the people, which is the moon. So the moon's over here. So trying to establish more control. Um, and actually, this is the United States rising sign. The United States is still struggling with that, to be honest with you, because of this. There'll still continue to be litigation, but there will be, I think, some increasing potential for violence over the next 6 months. So eclipses don't necessarily have their full effect on the day of the eclipse. They act, and we'll look at the second half of the eclipse next over the next couple of weeks because these come in twos. They always come in twos. And one, two. Okay. So, and I just realized that was a bad gesture in the UK. So so essentially Sun and Saturn um, in this proximity, there'll be a struggle between government and workers. There'll be a struggle between government and when I say workers, I'm not just I'm not just figuring government workers. I'm figuring all workers, okay? Because uh, government workers really aren't Saturnian. They're more Jupiterian, or they're more representatives of the king. That's what they're supposed to be. So if you work for the government, you serve the people. If you work for the government, ideally, you serve the people. That's the concept. Ideally, you serve the government, but you also serve the people. And I think a lot of places around the world have lost that particular vision over the past 60 years or so. And I just actually saw a really interesting YouTube video, and I can't remember the name of the guy, but he was talking about the start of oligarchies, which I spoke about, I think, last week. It actually happened in 1971 uh, with a memo issued by a gentleman named Lewis Powell, who went on to become a Supreme Court justice. I would argue it started even before that. I would argue it started in the 1950s with the military-industrial complex gaining ascendancy in the United States. And also, commercial interests have always been a controller uh, in many economies. So I think it's I think it's a bit trying to think of the right word, the exact specific word. I think it's a bit um, unconscious. Maybe that's the best word to to ascribe what's happening with um, the various commercial interests around the world uh, as and uh, and technocracies uh, running things as being a recent phenomenon. It's been going on for really quite a long time, and so and 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 there have essentially always been what I would call vested interests, manipulating governments for their own purposes. So essentially that's, so um, even in places like China, historically, India, historically, there has always been what I would call the in crowd. The main influencers. They're just more obvious nowadays because money is concentrated. We went through this period where this enhanced mobility break after World War, both before and after World War II. Let's say consistent with the 20th century, which started to be shut off around 1971, 1980 or so. But it was always in effect. And a lot of that was built on, especially in the United States, was built on post-war prosperity and the high demand for commercial goods, and that spread throughout the world, and we had uh, a period where it didn't seem like people were running things, but they really were. So, and just to emphasize this, if we look at this one, this combination right here, there'll be what I would call out and out lies. I don't like the term misinformation because um, misinformation has political overtones to it, and I don't like the political overtones to it. Uh, but lies are a perfectly acceptable term for me because, or else information manipulated to further a cause. Maybe let's put it that way. Okay. And also that combination shows up in the Navamsha chart, especially behind the scenes, especially with secret organizations or with organizations that run things behind the scenes. And also to a certain extent, because we have this Rahu Venus Mercury combination in the eighth house, a lot of that stuff actually does get revealed during eclipses. That's one of the things about eclipses that get overlooked, I think, when they're being analyzed. Yes, they're disruptive, but they actually reveal the shadow. They reveal the pattern of life uh, that's hidden from day-to-day view. So secrets get revealed, secrets get uncovered, and I think we're going to see a lot of stuff come out of about governments internationally over the next month or so. This eclipse is mostly over Canada. It's mostly the line is over Canada, all through the United States and down through South America. It's going to impact here, or it's going to be more obvious in this side of the world than in other sides of the world. But believe me, that's taking place all over the world. It's not really a new phenomenon. And again, I don't want people to start painting me as a conspiracy theorist. If you've been paying attention, you can see these things have been the transfer of wealth over the past 30 years, more intensely in between 2020 and 2022, was not an illusion. That's measurable. So so something happened to cause that. So if you want to be nice about it, you can say, well, uh it's market shifts or it's supply and demand. But um, who the heck was it? I think it was Adam Smith, uh, who warned about businesses meeting in one place, conspiring to hurt uh, the general public. So this is not a new phenomenon. Adam Smith described what he saw as a functioning mechanism when he wrote his book on capitalism. He didn't view. Uh, I think he liked it, but it's but essentially it wasn't even an ideological position. When Marx published the Communist Manifesto, Marx thought he was describing a natural law of history. So essentially, um, these folks, many, especially the folks who are behind economic philosophies, think they're describing natural laws. And it's only after they're actually instituted that we can see how unnatural some of these actual mechanisms are and how they work and where they work and what's needed to make them work. So it's and how they can be abused, to be quite honest. So again, I'm neither um, I'm not defending any particular system, economic system, but I am just saying there have been shifts made in the world economy to make China more prosperous, to make people in the United States, a certain group of people in the United States more prosperous, and people in Europe more prosperous, and a certain group of people in Europe more prosperous. So this isn't, like I said, this isn't. I'm not attacking anybody. This is part of the system. But I I'd be negligent if I didn't describe the system, and also the fact that there are certain combinations which are designed to protect the king and the queen of the chart, that is the sun and the moon, and also uh, to a certain extent, uh, there is always a struggle between um, in a society over who controls wealth. So I wouldn't even ascribe it to being a power struggle. I think it's just an ownership struggle. Okay. So at least between this combination, do I prefer a free enterprise system? Yeah. Yeah, I was raised in that, and that's what I prefer. Uh, but 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 at the same time, this particular Rahu Venus conjunction, I think, will uncover a lot of government secrets, a lot of belief secrets, and a lot of dogma that we've been fed over the past, I would say, 30 years or so. So This will be really interesting. Um, and okay, so let's go back. Some possibilities of earthquake because of the Mars K2 aspect. Mars is an air sign, K2 is in an earth sign, so that's quite possible. So again, I'm not trying to scare people. Air travel is a little bit dicey until around mid-March, and at least at the end of March, when Saturn moves out of Aquarius, there'll be fewer mistakes made in air travel, I think. Okay, so that's one thing to be optimistic about, and also fewer mistakes made in over assessing markets. Well, will the Trump reforms go through? A lot of them. I don't think all of them will go through, but a lot of them will. Okay. Uh, and I've already spoken to a certain extent about Canada, and um, I believe I spoke about Russia last week, and I do think we are going to see an end to the war, hopefully by June of this year, and but also a more antagonistic relationship developing between Russia and Europe in general, which is really not the way I was hoping things would go. But again, Russia did start the war. I'm not letting them off the hook, but um, I think I think there has to be some kind of an end to this. So let's go back to the current chart, okay? And I'll discuss your astrological signs, okay? So for Aries we have Jupiter in the second house. Again, good for wealth, good for ambition. You know, there's a lot of traveling, good for financial growth for this sign. You have to watch out for being overly optimistic, especially with relationship partners, at least from this sign. And when I say relationship partners, expenditure patterns, that becomes kind of tricky. There'll be a lot of frustration. People want to buy things they put off buying for a long time, like houses. And also, but spouses will be a little bit more difficult to deal with because of the Venus Rahu Mercury combination. Um, Mars, Jupiter's in the second house. That's good. Mars is in the third house. Good for ambition, maybe a little bit too aggressive, to be honest with you. So some people will not hesitate to lie to get what they want. Moon is in the fourth house. That's good for financial gain and also for some domestic tranquility. K2's in the sixth. Have to watch out for diseases. That's still a problem until K2 changes signs in July. Um, and we have Sun and Saturn in the 11th house. So slow gains, but steady gains. And Rahu, Venus, Mercury in the 12th house. So again, watch out for overexpenditure, watch out for impulse buying. Everybody's susceptible to that right now, but Aries in particular is. For a Taurus, Taurus has Jupiter in the first house. For the first lord is in the 11th house. So financial gains, more money spent on friends. Not necessarily a bad placement. Mars is in the second house. People will be aggressive about pursuing their interests. Moon in the third, a little bit ambivalent about what they want, though. K2's in the fifth. Children will be difficult to deal with. They'll have some social problems. And Sun and Saturn in the 10th house. Watch out for excessive workload for Taurus. And Rahu, Venus, Mercury will be in the 11th house. That's good for financial growth, again, for the sign. For Gemini, Gemini will be afraid of losing relationships. It will be afraid of losing money. It will be afraid of people lying about it, especially over the next couple of weeks, lying about the sign. And after the next couple of weeks, this will change to gains. It will change to financial gains for this sign. Moon is in the second house, so that, again, like I said, some anxiety, some uncertainty, but essentially good for money and good for recognition. K2's in the fourth house, some disruptions still in home life. Career life is fame, but maybe just being spread a little bit too thin. But that's not a problem for this particular sign. This particular sign likes being busy. Sun and Saturn are in the ninth house. Good for financial growth, but again, slow, steady, and maybe some problems with the government. Okay. Or Cancer. Cancer has Moon in the first house. This isn't a bad placement. It's very good, as a matter of fact. So the moon's in its own sign, so the sign will be very popular, very a lot of people will continue through the next couple of days, and there will be changes, especially in the sign, for the sign monetarily, because the sun is in the eighth house along with Saturn. So again, unexpected financial support, unexpected governmental support for the sign. Um, Sun is Lord of one, two, three, four. So we already spoke about the sun. My apologies. K2's in the third house. This sign will have a lot of courage and ambition. One, two, three, four. Sun, Saturn in the eighth house. Again, this is a difficult transit. I've spoken about this before. It's called an Ashtami Shani. It's where a person tries to rebuild their life or reconsider their goals or their options in life. So it's a pretty important transit. It's like a very short 7.5 year period of Saturn, but also more intense because the person's afraid of being imprisoned or restricted or not being able to do what they want to do. And that's always a little bit of a problem for this particular sign. And again, this fear of being locked up or confined will go away within about by the end of the month. Okay. And career-wise, good for career patterns. Overall, this is not a bad placement. Venus, Mercury, good for gains, some financial expenses though, and also Jupiter is in the 11th house. So actually some gain of knowledge, some gain of recognition. For Leo, this is August 15th to September 15th, just to give you a reference point. This particular combination indicates this sign will be drawn to relationships, but again, don't get involved in them until towards the end of the month. And K2's in the second house. Again, there will be blocks in terms of how this um, sign's speech is viewed. And when I say blocks, people will either deliberately misunderstand or deliberately lie about what the person is doing. Um, it isn't bad because actually it's pretty forceful. K2 in the second house is a pretty forceful phenomenon for this particular rising sign. And it's in Mercury sign. So, but again, some positions it had taken, and this is Donald Trump's chart, will be modified. This is Donald Trump's rising sign, will be modified over the next month or re-examined in light of new data. It won't go away forever. The mission that this sign has set for itself won't go away forever. If you're a Leo rising, if you're a Leo sun, but you will fall back a little bit and just say, well, what am I failing to consider? Or should I adopt other strategies? So that'll delay progress for the next month and a half. Let's see now. Sun and Saturn are in the seventh house. So you will have both opponents and allies uh, in relationship partners. Okay. And that also includes business partnerships. The seventh house isn't just connected with husband and wife, it's also connected with business partnerships. And let me just see now. So we already spoken about the Rahu Venus combination. So some hidden facts will come out during this particular time, especially about court cases and court involvements. And there will be some blocks from courts for this particular sign, and or some legal blocks, more correctly. And Jupiter's in the 10th house. So essentially, whatever this sign is doing over the next 2 years, it shows good progress of achieving what it wants to achieve. So, um, but again, immediately some delays because of this combination over here. But Mars is in the 11th house. Friends will become enemies or fighters, that kind of. Um, for Virgo, Virgo has K2 in the first house. The sign will be very intuitive, very productive, but a little bit discontented with where they are financially. Sun and Saturn, they'll feel like they're being given way too much work and facing way too many obstacles. Venus is in the seventh house, is exalted. So again, this feeling of trying to get what you want, trying to get, and looking at it and saying, well, is that achievable? And second guessing yourself, that'll go on at least until the end of the month. Okay. Um, let's see now. Jupiter is in the ninth house. This is good for luck, good for financial growth. Mars is also aspecting the first house. So Jupiter and Mars aspecting the first house leads the sign to actually teaching more, actually advising more, actually doing more, especially career-wise. Moon is in the 11th house, temporary gain of income, which is a good thing, okay? And new friends with Moon in this house and more popularity. For Libra, Libra has Sun, Saturn in the fifth house, so money which has been owed this sign or past life or past work the sign has done will be rewarded, or past life this or past work uh, this sign hasn't done will be penalized. So if there's been an educational gap or something like that, that'll show up during this particular time. But also, it's generally considered to be an auspicious combination because Sun's the Lord of the 11th house of gains, and but it can bring unexpected illnesses, and Sun with Saturn can produce good financial results for this particular sign. Venus is in the sixth house, so there's a struggle between what I need and what I just want, to quote a line from a Soft Machine song. And so that struggle will be ongoing for the next few couple of months, okay? And Jupiter's in the eighth house, unexpected gains, unexpected windfalls, surprising combinations of people coming to your aid. Mars is in the ninth house, good for money. Moon is in the 10th house, good for career. And they'll continue to be so over the next week. And finally, K2 in the 12th, a lot of spending. So this sign has to watch out for spending. For Scorpio, Scorpio has Mars in the eighth house. We've spoken about this previously. That combination is a little bit tough because the sign has to, uh, it feels like it's locked. But Sun and Saturn in the fourth house, it's more focused on security. Venus and Mercury in the fifth house, along with Rahu. Short-term gains that come from surprising sources. So people who you consider enemies or adversaries will be on your side. Jupiter's in the seventh house, new opportunity for relationships and business partnerships. Mars is in the eighth, uh, and that will cause increased fights with spouse or relationship partners. Moon is in the ninth. This is overall not considered to be a good placement for this rising sign, but overall it does give a change in luck, and it gives a positive change in luck for this rising sign and for the sun sign. And K2's in the 11th house. Again, Scorpios shouldn't trust their friends. Sagittarius is the next sign we're going to discuss, and the Lord of Sagittarius is in the 6th house. So this gives legal ties or um, opposition because of legal considerations for the next 3 to 4 months. And let's see now. Sun and Saturn are in the 3rd house. So there's a lot of bravery, a lot of willingness to push through and get things done, excuse me. Venus and Mercury are in the 4th house. So again, this isn't a bad combination, but it does tend to make the sign a little bit confused about what it wants in terms of its um, domestic life, what it views as being important, also finding out that people have been lying to you a great deal. Uh, Mars is in the 7th house, outward opposition from allies or business partners. Excuse me, let me clear this out. Okay, so Mars in the 7th, uh, aspecting K2 in the 10th. So you will have some people like violently attacking you, other people trying to understand you and be logical about the changes you're asking for. K2's in the 10th. It'll seem like the direction uh, will be a little bit confused, but it looks like it's starting to dawn, and there will be a shift in the signs of luck next by July. For Capricorn, Capricorn has Venus in the 3rd house, exalted, along with debilitated Mercury, so you have to be careful about long-term investments and also listening to financial advisors. Um, that's just a caution. You may actually end up with some good investments, but uh, I would recommend not making new investments until early April. Um, Mercury, yeah, yeah, so you're not getting the best judgment from the sign. And Venus is making you overly optimistic. Uh, Jupiter is in the 5th house. Good for financial gains from existing investments. Okay, so it doesn't mean you have to flip out and all, dump all your work, but existing investments, existing practices are fine. Mars is in the 6th house, will give you kind of a fighting spirit. Moon is in the 7th house. They'll be interested in changing business partners or even relationship partners. K2, K2's in the 9th house. That's good for It's good for a certain extent for speculation, but a little bit down the road. Maybe wait until the end of March. So overall, not a bad week for Capricorn, but again, not a week to take chances. For Aquarius, we have Saturn and Sun in the 1st house. Uh, that's actually a good combination for financial gains for the sign, especially through partnerships. Um, However, combustion is still very much in effect, and I would be a little bit worried about taking like a lot of undue risks. And also, relationship partners will be a little bit tense and a little bit um, cranky from this combination. Venus, Mercury, and Rahu in the 2nd house, not bad. Financial gains are evident for this sign, but they may be a little bit unrealistic. So back off a little bit from getting overly optimistic, but this is essentially an optimistic placement. Jupiter's in the 4th house. Um, that's a good placement for gains of education. Mars is in the 5th. This particular combination is good for financial growth, especially through real estate. Moon is in the 6th, so there will be some fights or arguments with children or with spouse because of this placement, and also with the general public. Okay. K2's in the eighth, so read the fine print in any contract you undertake, any kind of legal document. But overall, not a bad week for Aquarius. For Pisces, Venus is in the first house along with Mercury. Mercury's debilitated, as we said before, but Venus exalted cancels that debilitation. Still, there will be some problems or some dangers connected with home renovation. Jupiter's in the third house, good for diplomacy. Moon's in the fifth house, potential for love affairs or romantic involvements. Relationship partners will seem a little bit distant or isolated. And Sun and Saturn are in the 12th house. So again, be a little careful about number one, illicit affairs. Number two, be careful about over investing or over purchasing and thinking you can catch up later on. This is a time for caution in purchasing, not a time for wild purchases. Uh, some individual charts that may not hold true. I'm just saying, just in general. So keep that in mind. I'm talking about general indicators, not individual charts. All right, so let's go on to the map of the world. Yeah, let's see if we can expand it. All right, so we're gonna close it. And maybe it'll do what I want it to do this time. Okay, so this will be a really quick glance because I'm running up against the clock here. Okay, so there's a lot of activity and really, again, I'm showing a lot of activity in the western provinces of Canada. Now, now I have heard there's some parts of this country seem more aligned with the United States than this part of the country, than let's say Ontario and Quebec are. Okay, so this may explain why we're having all this activity over here. Uh, there will be uh, some financial growth in Alaska. That's possible. But I think you'll see some governmental scandals uh, in Western Canada and also um, some increased violence in both Arizona and Mexico, and also increased possibility of earthquakes in that part of the world. Um, yeah, it's interesting in the West Coast seems contained between these Rahu inspired lines and this Mars line. So I'm hoping there won't be violent activity in California or earthquakes, but that's a possibility. There's a moon line running through um, central Canada and also through Texas, all the way down to Texas and Mexico. So that does indicate change of governments in those regions. For there's a Jupiter line running right through uh, Michigan, uh, to uh, close to Toronto and Ottawa, and also down through Puerto Rico. So I know there's a change in governorship in Puerto Rico, and also you may see a change in government um, in the Dominican Republic, possibly. Also, Guyana and Venezuela look like they're in, in an adjustment period, and God, Brazil is really getting whacked by planetary lines. Um, so it looks like there's a lot of protest activity in Brazil, a lot of restrictive activity in Brazil, and and Mercury are right on top of each other. So we should be hearing more from that part of the world. Actually, it's surprising to me that we're not. But again, most news in the United States is focused on the United States. We tend to lose track of other parts of the world. Um, there's a moon line running through the Azores that probably means just rain. And over by Central Africa, some minor changes in government. There are no lines running through England, France, Spain, but that doesn't mean there's no activity happening there. It's just that they're not influenced by this particular astrocartography map. And there are no lines running through Germany as well. But there is a Jupiter line running close to Ukraine, and Sun and Saturn lines running through Turkey and down through Egypt, Sudan, and all the way to South Africa. So I think you'll see a lot of judicial reform happening in these countries, all the way down to South Africa, and also maybe some increased suffering in Ukraine. But I'm optimistic that we will have a resolution shortly. There's a Rahu line and the Mercury and a Venus line running up through Iran. Um, and there's a sun line running through close to Western Iran and Saudi Arabia. So I think we can expect some political scandals. Um, I don't think bombing necessarily, although I could be wrong about that, but there is increased tension in Afghanistan and Pakistan. I'm really worried about that part of the world. And there's increased, it's spilling over a little bit into India. So I would keep a close watch on that part of the world because of possible threats of violence or even militarization of the region. There's nothing happening for the first time in a long time. There's hardly anything happening in China, Vietnam, Cambodia. So that's probably a good thing. Korea, though, is showing Sun Saturn Rahu lines are permeating Korea and Japan, so we can expect some disruptions to those economies. The Philippines and Indonesia are being kind of hit by those same lines, and so is Australia. So I'm not saying that Australia will necessarily go into um, a decline, but it looks like there'll be government scandals coming out of Australia, and there's a Mars line heading out to Eastern Australia, kind of moving towards New Zealand, but I'm not expecting a lot of violence in New Zealand, but maybe some violence in Eastern Australia. So that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed this particular broadcast. I'm trying to keep them a little bit tighter than I did before. And so I'll see you next week. I hope everyone made it to the end. And again, I really appreciate your support. If you can hit the subscribe and like button, and also ring the notification bell. I really appreciate it. You'd be doing me a great favor. And I thank you and I love you all. And take care over the next week. People are going to be a little bit tense. Okay? Over the next, I would say over the next 3 weeks or so. Okay? All right. Have a good one. And remember, nobody can force you to do something you don't want to do. Okay? Unless it's a policeman. All right. All right. All right. So let's see now. So let's stop recording. And okay. All right. And I'm just joking with you. I always encourage people to take as much control of their destiny as they reasonably can. Okay. So don't let anybody tell you can't do something unless it's absolutely illegal. Okay. All right. Bye bye now, everyone. Have a great week. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Be well.